Okay, so you remember last time we were looking at this idea of the rational actor, right, using our median voter model, and we were also looking at some tax and antitrust issues. And we had started off by looking at some tax issues where we said, okay, the IRS was making some changes to the way that you were able to have depreciation. So we had our old plan was where, in essence, you could depreciate half the value over 5 years, and their new plan was that you could depreciate the whole price of the team over 15 years. And we saw what some of the numbers were for that. So for example, we had a graph that kind of looked like this. This is just a reminder. This was already in the last video, where we had here was our E greater than 0, and here was our G greater than 0. And we said, okay, we've got some kind of function that kind of looks like this. And this guy was 41.5, and this guy was 16. And we said, okay, here was essence was the size of our gain, 41.5 minus 2.6, right, times E. Okay? And this is what allowed us to determine whether the new plan for depreciation was more valuable or less valuable than the old plan, right? So once again, right, if you saw net operating revenue after non-roster depreciation, but before roster depreciation greater than 16 million, then the owner was going to be worse off, right? So whether the IRS was correct or not in their new plan versus their old plan was dependent upon the value of E, okay? So let's kind of look at some tax problems that creates, because in essence what we have to do, we now have this problem where we've depreciated our team for 15 years, and now what do, right? Well, at the end of our 15 years, we have a couple different options. We can reorganize the team. Okay. So remember, we'll reorganize the team as a corporation to take advantage of the lower corporate tax rate. So for this first 15 years, our owners get the benefit on their personal taxes of depreciation, right? But now that that's gone, he's going to have to pay higher taxes and probably just at a higher rate. So one of the things he can do, of course, is just to reorganize the team, as we saw earlier in the course. The second thing that they could do, of course, is to sell the team. And then in essence pay capital gains taxes, right? But remember, in essence, you have now, because of depreciation, claimed that the team is worth nothing. But you sold it for something, right? So you have, in essence, you have excess depreciation, and you're going to have to pay capital gains taxes on that difference between the sales price and the book value, right? Which is in essence going to be the basis. So since the capital gains tax rate is typically lower than the personal income tax rate, once again, the owner is going to be better off, right? So we've kind of looked at the tax issues. Now let's kind of look at some antitrust issues, because remember, we have our Sherman Antitrust Act. And we kind of looked at this when we were looking at movies and music. Our Sherman Antitrust Act is passed to combat monopolies, right? Now this was later supplanted or supplemented by the Clayton Act, which allowed private lawsuits basically to recover damages. So in essence, what the Sherman and the Clayton Act do is that they ban firms from getting together to set prices. In other words, to form cartels or to collude, right? So firms are not allowed to collude. The problem is that, remember, baseball has this exemption from antitrust, right? And remember, the other leagues, so you've got the NFL, for example, we saw that. They have a limited exemption in terms of broadcasting rights. And we saw that earlier, where in essence the NFL can get together as one league and say, okay, you have to negotiate with the entire league rather than negotiating with individual teams. So in essence, what we have here is we have a situation where thanks to sports having basically to a degree either full or at least a limited exemption from the Sherman Antitrust Act, they're able to get together and have greater power to protect their own market power and basically increase league profits. So this gives them lots of power over players, negotiations, team locations, TV broadcasting rights, contracts, being able to determine, do we want to have a team in this city or do we not have a team in this city, et cetera, right? So how do these tax breaks and a lot of this cartel behavior affect others? Because in essence, what we see here is we see some tax issues with our leagues, and we see some cartel issues with the league, and we want to know how these guys are going to affect others, right? So we know that cartels have the effect of increasing price and decreasing quantity. Okay? So in other words, there's going to be less of the sport provided, right? So you have fewer teams than is optimal, and the price is going to be higher than it should be. And you can see this in some of the other leagues that have been formed in the past, right? Where you've had the XFL from 20 years ago, and now the XFL is trying to restart. You have World Football League and all these other things. These are other people trying to compete with the NFL and trying to bring in and fulfill fans' desire for football that they're not getting, right? Well, the reason they're not getting that is because of this cartel and tax break behavior by, for example, the NFL, which means that in essence they provide less output than they should be. You also have at the exact same time taxpayers, that would be you and me, paying higher taxes. And the reason for this is that for any level of government spending, right, whatever level it is that you want that to be, since owners and stadiums and since team owners and the league pay fewer taxes than they should due to tax breaks, that tax burden gets distributed among everyone else, right? So in essence, our taxes go up slightly, despite the fact that these other people are essentially getting tax breaks. You also have the situation for media providers, where the media providers are going to have to negotiate with the league itself rather than individual teams. Now, of course, we saw this in the NFL for the most part. It doesn't happen in baseball as much. But this gives the league a whole lot more power and basically increases the cost to media providers and advertisers, right? So we see these increased costs to media providers, right? One of the reasons that ESPN is so expensive for cable and satellite providers is due to the fact that they're able to charge that. Well, part of that is due to demand. Part of that is essentially due to costs, right? So who do we see who benefits from all of this, right? We have this tax and cartel behavior, so we've seen kind of who's impacted. Let's see who kind of benefits. And it's pretty obvious that our largest beneficiaries are going to be the owners. Okay. So the owners are in essence going to see the value of the team rise. And they're going to see it rise significantly. Now, interestingly enough, the value of sports teams has been rising faster than the rate of return that you can get in the stock market, right? So here are our sports teams. And if we look at the change here, the rate of return on these guys versus the change in, say, the price of stocks, we can see that sports teams are increasing in value much more faster than they are in stocks, right? And there's a question is basically, why is this happening, right? It shouldn't do that. What you should see is you should see the price of the team equal to the present value, right, of, in essence, these future profits. All right? So just to kind of review here, when you're looking at our future value, here's our time period 1, here's our time period, or 0, here's 1, here's 2, here's 3, here's 4, here's 5, going out to however long it is that you want it to be. And we have some level of profit, and let's just assume that the profit's just some number. I'm just going to write 10 million here for each of these particular years for no particular reason, right? So we're earning $10 million in profit in each of these years. In essence, what we want to know is, okay, well, what is the expected value of that? And remember that our present value is going to be equal to the expected value. In this instance, of course, it's the expected value of these profits. T equals 1 to T minus all over 1 plus R to the T minus these costs. 1 to the T, 1 plus R to the T, right? So we know that our present value is equal to the expected value of these benefits minus the expected value of these costs. Well, all that I've done here in this 10 is just look at this guy, right? So we said, oh, okay, here's the benefits in year 1 minus the cost in year 1. That's going to be equal to 10 million. The benefits in year 2 minus the cost in year 2, it's going to be equal to 10 million. The benefits in year 3 minus the cost in year 3, it's equal to 10 million, right? Just to make the numbers nice. So that when we're looking at the present value of our team here, all right, 10 over 1 plus R to the 1, 10 over 1 plus R to the 2, 10 over 1 plus R to the 3, 10 over 1 plus R to the 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 over 1 plus R to the 5, right? And the present value here, depending upon what our interest rate is, and we can make the interest rate be any number it is that we want it to be, is going to be, in essence, the present value of this stream of profits, right? So what you should see is you should see price being equal to the present value of this stream of profits. And to see that that's true, let's assume that the price of the team is less than the present value of the profits. Okay? So let's just make up an example here. Let's do this in terms of a really, really, really simple interest rate of, say, 5%. So we have 1.05, clear. 10 divided by 1.05, all right? So we're going to see here 9.52 from this guy. Now we're going to have our 0.05%, right? So we've got 1.05, okay? And we're going to, on our handy-dandy calculator here, 10 divided by, open parentheses, 1.05 raised to the 2, close parentheses, close parentheses. Okay, this guy here, 9.07. Same thing here, we're going to have this 1.05, 1.05 raised to the 3rd, it's 1.157. So we're going to have 10 divided by 1.1507, 8.69. We're going to have 1.05 raised to the 1, 2, 3 to the 4, close parentheses. Now it's equal to 1.2155. So 10 divided by 1.2155, 8.22. And now we've got our last one here, 1.05 raised to the 5, close parentheses, equal to 1.27628. So we have 10 divided by 1.27628, 7.83. So here we can see our $10 1 year from now is worth, or $10 million in 1 year is worth $9.52 million. Our $10 million in 2 years is worth $9.07. Our $10 million in 3 years is worth $8.69 million. Our 10 in 4, $8.22 million. Our 10 in 5, $7.83, right? So when we add all this up, let's see what we're going to get. 9.52 plus 9.07 plus 8.69 plus 8.22 plus 7.83, right? So what we see here is the present value of our team is worth $43.3 million, right? So if the price of the team is, say, $30 million, here we have price being less than the present value. We can, in essence, go out, purchase the team for $30 million, or borrow the money. We don't even have to have the money. We'll go out and we'll borrow $30 million. We'll buy the team, and we'll have this stream of profits, $10 million in year 1, $10 million in year 2, $10 million in year 3, $10 million in year 4, $10 million in year 5, right? That has this present value of $43.33 million, and we're better off, right? We just made $13.3 million, right? So if the price is less than the present value, it doesn't make sense. It also doesn't make sense the other way around, right? If the price is greater than the present value, if somebody's willing to pay $50 million for the team, well, if I keep the team, it's worth $43.33 million, or I can sell the team for $50 million, take the $50 million and actually stick it in the bank, right? And over the next 5 years, it'll actually be worth even more than $50 million, okay? So we know here that the price of the team has to be equal to the present value of the future stream of profits. Now, of course, if the expected profits are going to be negative, and they're going to be negative for all years, so it's going to be negative 10 million, 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 right? Then the price of the team can't have any value. It has to be equal to 0 or even less than that, right? But in essence, what we see happening here is that the price has to be equal to the present value of these profits. So the question is, how can the price be increasing faster than what we see here with the price of stocks? It doesn't make any sense. People have really, really, really good information on stocks. They know what companies are doing what. Companies produce quarterly reports. We have really, really, really good information on sports. People know how many people go to the games. People sell, the owners sell the media contracts years out in advance, etc., right? So perhaps it's some kind of information updating problem. So perhaps we have some asymmetric information. And let's look at an example of this, all right? So let's assume that over time, all right, and here is our money. Let's assume that we've been getting a 5% rate of return. So here is our 5%. And now at time t0, there's some kind of change. And what that change does is that it alters the rate of return. So before, we know that teams are earning, say, a 5% rate of return every single year. Then all of a sudden there's a change which increases the rate of return to, say, 8%. Okay? Now, there's two different ways to look at this. One is that you can look at this as a rate of change going like this. So it's an 8% rate of change, 8% rate of change. The alternative way is to do something like this, where you could actually say, okay, not only do you have this 8% rate of return change, but there's also a fundamental change that happens here at time t0 that actually increases it like this and still get this 8%. Right? So this guy right here represents just simply a change in the rate of return. Right? change went from 5% to 8%. This guy right here represents the same change, this 8% rate of return now, and in addition to that, there's something else within that time period, T0, that actually just bumped up values by that amount. In other words, you could also have this bump and have the rate of return still being 5%. Right? So you could see the rate of return at 5%. Now you have this bump up, and it still stays at 5%. Right? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at both of these guys just to clarify the graph and make it a little bit simpler to see. So here's our time. Here's our dollars. Here's our 5%. We've got some time period T0. And now we have this rate of return, right? So in essence, what we have here is we've got our 5% here at this time. We have some bump that occurs. Could be anything. And now we're at 8%. Okay? Now, what you should do, remember, is what we've said is that the price has to be equal to the present value. We should see price instantly changing to this, but we don't. In other words, what we kind of tend to see is we see this adjustment path that kind of has a tendency to kind of go like this. So here, is our adjustment path over time. Okay? And one of the things that you will notice here, of course, is that this rate right here is actually higher than 8%. And it has to be, right? Because you have this bump here, you have to have something that now all of a sudden the adjustment path has to go faster than 8% to be able to catch up to the 8% rate of return. So you can kind of think of it like this. You're driving down the road and you're traveling at 80 miles an hour, right? And you pass a police officer and you continue at 80 miles per hour, this police officer, in order to catch you, he has to travel faster than 80 miles per hour. He has to travel, say, maybe 100 miles per hour to catch you, right? If by the time he passes you and then he decides to go 30 seconds later and he goes less than 80 miles an hour, he'll never catch you. If he goes 80 miles an hour, he'll never catch you. He has to go faster than 80 miles an hour to be able to catch you. It's the exact same thing here, right? We have this 5% rate of return. We have some kind of bump that occurs, maybe due to some contracts, or there's some instantaneous change in consumers' preference for the sport here at time T0. And in addition to that instantaneous bump, not only do we see that, but we see the rate of return increasing to 8%. Well, that means here in these time periods from, say, TO to, say, maybe T1, the rate of change along our adjustment path here has to be higher than 8%. So perhaps that's what's going on. Perhaps we have some kind of situation where prices are increasing faster than what we see in the stock market because we're on some adjustment path, and eventually we'll get to the point where the rate of return in sports is equal to the rate of return that you would have in stocks. It's also possible that you have basically a speculative bubble. So it's possible that prices are being bid up by speculators who buy the teams because they think the prices are going to keep going up. I mean, that's possible as well too. And of course, one of the things that's really, really interesting to note here is that no matter which of these is correct, the players actually want to continue the idea of a trust here, right? Because remember, what it basically does with the trust, we're limiting quantity. Here's our supply of this sport. Here's our marginal revenue product with the trust. Here's marginal revenue product without the trust. right? And clearly we can see prices are higher under the trust situation than they would be under the non-trust situation, right? So in a way, if you think about it, the players have an incentive for the sports league to continue to maintain a trust because in essence that gives them more market power and increases their revenue, okay? So we have this really interesting problem with, like we said, market power. So we have high ticket prices, and that's because we have no competition, there's no additional leagues. We're going to have a lack of competitive balance. Right? Leagues don't allow competition in these big markets. There's no way that the New York Yankees and the New York Mets are going to vote for another team to come into New York. All right? This leads us to high salaries. And even though the salaries are less than what they actually should be, they're higher than what they would be if there was more competition, right? Because more competition would lead to lower prices, right? So we have this market power leading to this high marginal revenue product, like we have situation here, and players are able to capture some of this higher price through their union, right? So now that you have a union, well, now we can have, say, strikes and lockouts as people argue over these additional profits from, say, P1 to P2. And then, of course, we have this problem with the stadiums, where this comes out into play in impacting the taxpayer, right? Where now you have host cities facing this all or nothing choice. So what are some of the remedies for this? Well, we have a couple of ones. One of them is basically direct regulation. Here we could create some federal agency whose job it is to regulate sports. We could take an antitrust approach. And with our antitrust approach, in essence, what we'll do is we'll break up the league into smaller competing leagues, right? Now, this has some problems. One of these, of course, being the problem of natural monopoly. And as you'll remember from your principles of micro class, the problem with natural monopoly is when you have long-run average costs that are declining over a large period, right? In a situation like this, it actually makes sense to have one firm creating, say, in this example, 100 units. We could do so at a price of, say, $1. Than it is to have two firms, each making 50 units each, right? So here you'd have, maybe this guy would be, say, $2.50, right? So you can see under this situation that perhaps sports is almost like a natural monopoly, right? I mean, we've had multiple leagues in the past, but they always kind of move towards one league. So maybe it's a natural monopoly situation. And if we were to break up the leagues through this antitrust approach into smaller leagues, then maybe we'd be right back to where we started. You also have the problem with this antitrust approach is that you have a large investment into fan identification, right? Where you would have to, this would all have to be done by a new league, right? And it's, you know, basically who's going to pay for those costs. And then, of course, any change in the status quo is going to alter everyone's welfare. Now, remember, when we write the word welfare in economics, we don't mean giving somebody a check because they're sitting at home on their duff. Welfare is the consumer and producer surplus, right? So any change that you have here is going to alter the status quo, right? So owners and players are going to lose as profits decrease. So here in a situation like this, we would see lower profits, all right? Because in essence, what we would have is we'd have a situation like this where we have these lower marginal revenue products, right? So you would see owners have lower profits. If there's lower profits, that means players' pay goes down. You also have fans win as costs decrease. And you might have taxpayers win as subsidies decrease. Right. So here we would see our subsidies going down because now, in essence, Dallas could say, oh, well, if the Texas Rangers don't want to play for us, then that's fine. We'll take the new, the Dallas Bears that are now part of the North American Baseball League. They'll move here and people will watch them as well, right? So we don't have to have this competition among cities for teams. It can be the other way around. Teams compete to be in the cities, right? You might have some labor management issues resolved, but you're going to see these changes in welfare. You'd also might see some talent issues. Talent would, in essence, reflect what people are actually willing to pay if we had this antitrust approach. All right. And then, of course, you could also have, as number 3 here, you can have some fan interest groups. All right. Who can, in essence, lobby like everybody else does. Now, we already saw the problem with this when we were looking at unions. You could have a situation where you have these positive externalities, right? So, for example, 100 fans get together and they say, okay, we don't like this. We want to remedy this situation. 10 of the fans go out and expend energy and make it happen. Well, the other 90 fans got all the benefits from the changes, but it didn't cost them anything in terms of time and effort. So everyone has a tendency to basically free ride off everybody else, the same problem that you would have in the unions or in any large organization. Okay? Okay, thanks a lot. I appreciate your time. And as always, if you have any questions, let me know.